precious. Good morning, friends. Welcome to a new project. I finished training 2 weeks ago, and also it's time to start coding. And let me bring you to a Code With Me session today. And let's see how many codes we can capture in one encounter. All right, let's start. So I already have checked the patient's birth and name, and they match. So I'm just going to start coding right now. So let's go to the assessment. So in the assessment, the patient has hypertension, diabetes, hyperlipidemia, ESRD, and is on dialysis. So let's start coding. So this is a project that is code all within the reporting period. So this is on the reporting period, and we can capture all codes in the encounter as long as it is clinically significant in the encounter. So first we have hypertension, diabetes, and ESRD. Those three conditions have causal link, and because they have causal link and ESRD has no specific etiology, it's not either from hypertension or it's not from diabetes. So we can combo code it with hypertension and also with diabetes. So we have in here I12.0, that is for hypertension with ESRD. We also have diabetes with ESRD, that is 1122, and we have an 18.6 for ESRD, and because the patient is on dialysis, it is Z99.2. Going down the line, the patient also has hyperlipidemia, which is E78.5. Oh, actually the patient has diastolic heart failure. So because there is hypertension, ESRD, and we also found out that the patient has diastolic heart failure, we can change our code from I12.0 to I13.2, and that is hypertensive heart CKD with heart failure stage 5 CKD or ESRD. And also the patient has diastolic heart failure, so that is I50.30. The patient is on atorvastatin. So the code for that is Z79899. That is long-term current use of other drugs. For diabetes, we have, if you have diabetes, E11.9, there is a tabular instruction that is use additional code of insulin, oral antidiabetic drugs, or oral hypoglycemic drugs. So we have here in the outpatient med list, the patient is actually in insulin. So we can add Z79.4, past medical history, nothing. Social history, there's no alcohol use or smoking status. Surgical history, there's none. So yes, that's it. We have 8 conditions to report in this encounter. I am wearing a medical coder sweatshirt, and I made this one at home. So this will also be available in my Etsy shop very soon. So thank you for supporting my small business, and now let's continue coding. So we have here another encounter. So let's see, this is a discharge summary. So resolved conditions are to be reported, and ruled out conditions should not be reported. So here the patient number 1 or primary diagnosis is dizziness. It could be from different conditions, but it is brought to clinically significant. So we can code dizziness. So Dizziness. The code for that is R42. Also, the patient has hypertensive urgency, essential hypertension, hyperlipidemia, chronic diastolic congestive heart failure, ESRD, and on hemodialysis, resolved constipation, which can be reported, GERD, and also an insulin-dependent type 2 diabetic patient. So, okay, let's start with these conditions. So we have hypertension, heart failure, and ESRD. So again, the code for that is I13.2. The patient has hypertensive urgency. So let's type urgency, hypertensive. So that is actually I10 still. When you type for hypertensive urgency, it says C hypertension, so that is I10, so we already coded that. The patient has hyperlipidemia. The patient has chronic diastolic heart failure, that is I50.32. The patient is said to continue home medications such as amlodipine, spironolactone, and valsartan. So that is Z79899. Long-term use of other drugs, N18.6 for ESRD, and Z99.2 for dependence on renal dialysis. Constipation, it is resolved, but it can be coded from discharge summary. So let's type constipation, and the code for that is K5900. And we have GERD, that is K21.9. Oh, let me add more. The patient also is insulin-dependent type 2 diabetic. We can code E11.22 because ESRD has no known etiology. There is no BMI to be reported. There's nothing from the physical exam. And in the med list, there is on insulin, so we can actually code Z79.4. So this patient has a personal history of TIA or CVA. So we can report history, personal, stroke. And the code for that is Z86.73. Let's put that right here. Okay, the patient also has cardiomyopathy, that is I42.9. The patient has pulmonary hypertension, that is I27.20. And also the patient has an old MI, so that is I25.2. Let's see if we can find more. I guess that's it. This discharge summary, this encounter is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 plus 8, 16. There is actually, just for this encounter, there are 15 codes. So this project is a little different from my previous projects because this project instruction is code all, as long as those conditions are brought into clinically significance in the encounter, in the present or in the current part of the chart. And it's actually current as well, or is actually being treated, being talked about in the current part of the chart. We can code that. All right, we have another chart here. And then let's make sure that they match. Okay, so the patient has hypercholesterolemia, that is E78.00. The patient has angina pectoris, I20.9. The patient is insulin dependent, diabetic insulin dependent, that is E11.9 and Z79.4. The patient has a history, has an atrial flutter ablated. So we can code Z8679. That is for the history of atrial flutter. And for the procedure, that is Z98890. Also, let's see. And we have continuous statin therapy, that is Z98899. And then, let's see. The patient has also is taking insulin. We already coded that, and Januvia, so Z79.84. What else? And the patient has a BMI of Z6830. So we can report that BMI because we have a clinically significant condition such as the diabetes. And then we have also, the patient is a former smoker, so that is Z87891, but I cannot code that yet until I found a condition that has a tabular instruction for coding former smoker. So I'm looking for like hypertension because I see that there is lisinopril, that is a medication for hypertension. If there is a hypertension, then I can code also the former smoker. There is GERD, K21.9. Let's find if there is medication for that. Oh, there is hypertension here. So we can code the former smoker. Let's see. Okay, so let's just look for support for GERD. If there's none, we can still report it without support. Yep, there's none. All right, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We have 12 conditions here. Okay, let's have one more encounter in this chart because this chart is kind of small. So let's see if it has the same codes. Same patient, different date of service, but let's see. All right, so again, we have an atrial flutter that was previously ablated, so we can code Z86.79 for history of atrial flutter. We can also code Z98890 for the post-procedural state or history of the ablation. We have E78.0 for hypercholesterolemia and Z79899 for the long-term use of the statin therapy. Yes, C98890 for other specified post-procedural states. And then I can see Humalog, Z789.4 for long-term use of insulin. That is in, insulin is a status code, so we can code that one. There's also Januvia, so we can code Z7984, I mean. If we can see diabetes. Oh yeah, there is diabetes and the support. We have also, the patient is a former smoker. We have hypertension with a support, so we can code Z87891 for the former smoker. And we have K21.9 for GERD, but it doesn't have a support, doesn't have a medication to support it. Let me double check. Yep, there's none. Okay, do we have other conditions here? That's it. Diabetes. Oh, actually diabetes is in the HBI. We can code that. There you go. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there are 10 conditions in this encounter. Okay, we have another chart here. Okay, so the patient had a history of stroke. And there isn't. Okay, all right. So the patient has a history of stroke. So we can do is history. We can index as history, personal, and then type stroke. So the code for that is Z86.73. Also, the patient has patent foramen ovale. So let's code patent foramen ovale. The code for that is Q21.12. The patient has hypertension, that is I10. Okay, we can code also the BMI of 30 because we have hypertension. Okay, and the patient is a smoker, so that is F17200, but there is a more specified type of tobacco, and that is cigarette. So the code will be changed into F17210, which is nicotine dependent cigarettes uncomplicated. And then let's see if we can find other condition. The patient has a sleep apnea, that is G4730. And the patient has high cholesterol, that is E7800. And that's it. So what else? Okay, so there's sleep apnea, but we need to make sure if we can find a CPAP as a support. No, there's none. Okay, so we can report that without support. Okay, we have another chart here. The patient has streptococcal pharyngitis, and that is JO2.0. There is no BMI to be reported. There is no other problem history. There's no social history. The patient is just here for the pharyngitis. So that's it. We only have one code. Let's go on. Let's move on to another encounter. The same chart, the same patient, different date of service. So the patient is here for acute upper respiratory infection. So to index that, we have infection, respiratory, and then upper acute, and that is JO6.9. So that's it. There's no BMI to be reported. There is no other problem. There's no social history. There's no surgical history. So there's only one condition, and that is the acute upper respiratory infection. So another one here is, this is the third encounter of this tiny chart. Let's see, let's just make sure that we're typing the provider's name. Okay, so there in the assessment, the patient has a pain in the throat and a pharyngitis. We are not going to code the pain in the throat because that is a sign or a symptom for pharyngitis. What are we just gonna report is the JO 2.9, which is acute pharyngitis. There's no other medical conditions here. There's no BMI to be reported. There's no problem history, social history, or surgical history.